Hi, I'm Haya Bishuti from Haya's Kitchen, and I'm super excited to be cooking some authentic traditional Palestinian recipes with you guys today. So in Arabic, I love to say, Yalla nutbukh. It's time to cook, and I'm ready to share an incredible recipe with you. And I'm starting off with something that is a beautiful recipe that truly represents the land of Palestine. Palestine has such a diverse terrain. You have cities that are coastal, you have cities that are mountainous, and you have the north and the south, and all of the different lands have, all of the different areas in Palestine have a different kind of specialty to what they like to make. And we are going to be making the national dish of Palestine, which is Msakhan. So Msakhan, I know it's a heavy word to say, but it's a beautiful dish, and there are so many different elements that come with it. We've got, Msakhan means in Arabic, it means for something to be reheated. And the reason why it's called that is because all of the different elements are basically made separately, and then it comes together to create this incredible dish that we all know and love, and hopefully you'll be able to make it very soon and share it with your friends, share it with your family, and celebrate the national dish of Palestine. So I want to tell you a little story about Msakhan, because everything that we have, everything in the Palestinian culture, in our food, in our cookbooks, in our recipes, all the dishes that we've inherited across the generations has a story. And it's important to tell these stories, and it's important to share these stories with you. So Msakhan is actually traditionally made during the olive harvest season. In October, November time is basically when Palestinians celebrate the olive harvest season. It's a massive celebration where families come together, they go to the olive groves, they pick the olives, they juice the olives to make the olive oil that they need. They also make their olives, their pressed olives, or preserved olives, as we like to say. And it's a beautiful celebration that the families kind of come together and get to enjoy together. And it's actually said that Msakhan is made as a celebration of the olive harvest season. So when Palestinians would basically produce all of their olive oil, they would be able to showcase the quality of their olive oil to the community. And it's kind of like this unwritten competition among the families in the community, because they would be able to sit and say, I have the best olive oil, I have the best olive oil, so let's kind of have like a little Msakhan cook-off, and we'll be able to determine who has the best olive oil. And Msakhan is traditionally eaten by hand, so I would highly recommend that you do that, but we'll get to that towards the end of the recipe. But for now, I want to talk to you guys about the process of how to make Msakhan. And I know there are so many different recipes, so many different cookbooks that represent this food, represent these recipes. But I sometimes feel like, there's something lacking here, something lacking there. Maybe there's a step that's missing. And I want to give you guys the full experience so that you can cook with me and we can make some Palestinian food together. So are you ready? Because I am. So we're going to start with the first step. With Msakhan, of course, the base of it is chicken. A lot of people, there's no variation to it. I know in Palestinian food we have some variations to different things, but with Msakhan, you don't mess around, it is chicken. And the way that I like to start my chicken is I like to boil it a little bit. First of all, to create a stock, but also to retain that moisture in the chicken. I feel like when you put the chicken into the oven straight away, you kind of lose a bit of that moisture, and I want to retain that moisture. So the way that we're going to start off is, I've got everything mapped out here, but don't worry, you're going to get the recipes and the ingredients to every single thing that you're going to be cooking. So don't worry, you'll get all the measurements, and I haven't skimped out on any of the ingredients. I promise you, it is the way that I make it. So we've got our pot here, and I'm going to be putting the chicken into the pot. So I've got whole chicken that I've asked the butcher to cut up for me. So I cut it up into 4 pieces, remove the neck, and just clean the chicken on the inside, and then we've got the skin on, and we've kept the bones on. You have to have the bones to retain that moisture and to create that kind of experience that you want to have at the end of the dish. So we're going to start putting the chicken into the pot, and we are going to layer it up in here. And don't worry, it could be a little bit snug, but it is completely fine because it's only going to be in here for about 15 minutes. So I'm going to move this out of the way. And then we're going to be adding our whole spices. So the whole spices, and these are kind of essential to basically all of the food that we make. We've got the cinnamon sticks, and the cinnamon sticks adds that kind of earthy flavor, and it complements the flavors that you have in this dish. So we're going to be adding about 1.5 stick. This is an itty bitty stick. We of course are going to be adding some onions, so it's just roughly chopped onions, because you need to add that flavor to the stock as well. We want to add as much flavor as possible to the stock. And then of course we've got bay leaves. So bay leaves are an essential whole spice in Palestinian food. You're going to find it across all of the dishes that I make. And again, it just adds this kind of earthy flavor to the stock. And this is basically the base of a lot of the stocks that I make. So I'm adding a bunch of the bay leaves, and then we've got cardamom. So cardamom is a beautiful flavor that you would find in our coffee. So we drink it in our coffee. We add it a lot to our coffee, but it's a very kind of core element or a core ingredient in our dish. So this is the cardamom. This is actually a dried cardamom. You can have fresh cardamom, you can have dried cardamom, but it adds the same texture and the same flavor to the dish. So I'm just gonna add that to the pot. And then the last element that we're going to be adding in terms of the spices is our cloves. So the cloves, again, has a beautiful flavor to it. It has a beautiful kind of like a spice, a bit of a kick to it, but it complements all of the flavors, and not too many. I've got just like not even a handful. My hand's small, so. And then we're going to be adding our water. So I've got some hot water. It was boiled, and we're gonna be adding that to the pot here. So I'm gonna add that on top of here. And then the last element that we're going to be adding is our salt, of course. I like to use sea salt, fine sea salt. I feel like sea salt adds a lot of flavoring. It seasons really well. It might seem like a lot, but it's not, trust me. I don't over season. You can also adjust. You don't have to necessarily stick to the seasoning. But I do like to give measurements to salt, because I feel like sometimes you end up having like a dash of salt, and you end up having an under-seasoned dish. So this is about a teaspoon, but you can adjust depending on your flavor. So I'm just gonna add this to the dish, and then I'm gonna mix it through. Just get a spoon. Okay, so I'm just gonna mix this through, make sure the salt has blended in with all of the chicken, and then we're gonna be going straight to the oven. And you're gonna be putting this on the largest oven stovetop, basically, because you want it to boil, and you want it to just make sure that it's kind of semi-cooked, the chicken. So I'm gonna put this here, and we're moving to the oven. Okay. I love gas ovens. I feel like with gas, you're able to control more of the heat. You're able to create that kind of experience. Obviously, in Palestinian culture, we have, they used to cook on coal, they used to cook outside. And so I feel like gas is the closest option, or the closest experience to that. And it creates that kind of flavor and that texture that you would want in your food. So we're going to be leaving this on the stove. We're going to let it boil for a little bit. Once it starts to boil, we're just going to put the lid on top of it for about 15 minutes. And then we're going to be transitioning onto our next step. Okay, so I want to talk to you guys a little bit about sumac. And sumac is honestly the key ingredient in Msakhan. So I'm going to pull it up for you guys, and I've got it in this beautiful Hebron ceramic, and there's a beautiful story that is linked to that as well. But the sumac basically is a berry. So it's harvested, I think in the fall time, and it's basically, it's like a red berry, and they crush it. And there are different ways to crush it. So you can either crush it super fine, or you can crush it a little bit thicker. I prefer to have it a little bit grainier, because it adds more flavor, and it also adds a bit more color to the dish. So the version that I have is, of course, from Palestine. You will find a lot of sumac or sumac in different supermarkets. There's a lot of like commercialized sumac that I feel is not good quality. First of all, when you open up the jar, you need to take a sniff. Take a smell. So honestly, if you guys could smell this, I wish we could capture that on camera, but you can smell it. You can smell that tanginess. You can smell that lemony flavor. You can smell that kind of zing to it. And it's got a kind of a strong flavor to it, but it pairs beautifully with the onions, with the chicken, and you can use it literally with anything, in salad dressings, on toast, with eggs. I usually do eggs with sumac. And it's a beautiful accompaniment to any of the dishes that you want to make. And so I would always recommend that the darker the sumac is, the better quality it is, and always try to take a little sniff of it to make sure that it is good quality and it's got that smell. And I actually get it from an incredible Palestinian supplier that actually gets it directly from Palestine. So I know that I'm getting the best quality of sumac that you can find, and it is very much associated with Palestinian culture and with our identity. So this is the sumac. I've got it in this plate, and we're going to be adding it to the chicken a little bit, but we're also going to be adding it a lot to the onions. And it's a beautiful accompaniment. You're going to be able to see how it kind of changes the color of the onions, and you get to see that whole process. So sumac, it's a game changer. Highly recommend. It is the most essential element in your cupboard, and I would highly recommend that you have it. Another thing that I want to talk to you guys about real quickly is about these jars. So I know these are kind of like old school jars, and people actually associate them with their grandmothers because grandmothers would always have their stuff kind of in jars. And I went through a process of basically reorganizing my whole spice cupboard. So what I did was I got all of these different jars. I've got these larger jars, I've got slightly smaller jars depending on the quantity of the spice that I've got. And I put a label on it. So this has sumac, of course, and I've got everything else labeled on it. But the reason why I do it first, obviously it organizes your spice jar, your spice cupboards, your spice jars in general, but it also preserves the spice. So instead of having like a bag of a spice and then closing it up, the kind of the freshness of that spice goes when it's not preserved or it's not kind of contained in an airtight container. So I would highly recommend that if you want to get larger quantities of spices, just go to the spice market, get your spices in large quantities, and then just basically put them in jars. And they will retain their freshness, they will retain their quality, and you won't regret it. So that's just a tip from me to you. Okay, so the chicken has now been cooking on the stove for about 15 minutes. As you can see, the chicken's like slightly cooked, but not too much, and it's gonna continue to cook in the oven. But what I wanna do now is drop the knife, and we're gonna take the chicken out. So I'm just gonna put it on a plate here because I'm gonna be adding all of the spices that are gonna be put onto the chicken for the oven. So I'm pulling them all out from the pot, and then you're gonna be able to see the color of the stock. So the stock kind of got a bit of that flavoring from the chicken, it got a bit of the flavoring from the spices, and it's going to add more flavor to the onions that we're going to be cooking in a little bit. So we've got nearly all of the chicken out. I've got about 2 chicken here. I mean, growing up, we were always afraid to have too little food. So my grandmothers would always cook in abundance. And I'm trying to kind of relearn that system of like not overcooking. But in all honesty, a lot of our dishes, we can't cook for less than like 3 to 4 people, and that's just the way that the way that our food kind of is designed. So I've got 2 chickens here. You can also like reduce it if you want to make 1 chicken. It's really up to you, and honestly you can just half the ingredients. So very easy process to go through. So I'm going to grab a bowl, and I'm going to grab a sieve as well. I'm going to move this chicken out of the way and make some space for me. So I'm gonna grab the pot, grab the bowl, and then we've got a sieve, because we just wanna sieve out the whole spices, but we're not gonna throw them out. We're gonna put them back with the chicken. So I'm gonna pour it through, and as you can see, the water now has like a bit of like a yellow tint to it, which is perfect because it means it kind of took some of those flavorings. We've got a rogue bay leaf in the pot. Just kind of sieve it out and then return it back to the pot. And we're going to be using this for the onions. Now, another tip for you guys with your stock is if you have too much stock left, you don't need to throw it out. You can literally put it in either ice cube trays, put it in the freezer, or you can put it in a Tupperware or something in the freezer. You can use that for chicken stock later, or for a chicken soup maybe later. So never throw out any chicken stock that you have. Always use your chicken stock. So that is the process. We're gonna move that out of the way. I'm actually gonna move the pot out of the way. It's a little bit hot. Okay, and I'm gonna move this out of the way. And then we're gonna bring our chicken. We can get rid of our fork and knife. And I'm gonna bring over my spices. So I've pre-measured my spices, but again, you're gonna get all of the breakdown of the ingredients. The spices are honestly, truly, across all of our food, more or less the same. And we've got, the spices that we've got in this bowl are basically cinnamon powder, nutmeg powder, black pepper, allspice, so not 7-spice, allspice powder. Allspice is another berry, so it's kind of like the sumac, but it's an allspice berry, and it's truly something that you need to add to all of your food, and we actually add it to all of our food. And then we've got, of course, the fine sea salt in there, and we've got a bit of this sumac in the mix. And the sumac, again, adds that kind of tanginess to the chicken, which will complement the rest of the dish. So I'm going to be adding this, but first I'm going to be trying to gracefully put my gloves on for you guys. And I'm going to just be rubbing this all over the chicken. So you just want to make sure it's kind of evenly rubbed onto the chicken. I think I did a good job with that. Okay, we are good to go. So what you're gonna do is, I've mixed it all together. I like to actually mix my spices in a bowl just to make sure that everything is even. If you start to like kind of sprinkle individually the spices on top of the chicken, you might find one piece that has a bit more cinnamon, another piece that has a bit more pepper. So when you mix your spices in a bowl, it always kind of like balances out and evens out the spices on the food. So I'm gonna start to like sprinkle it on top of here. It might seem like a lot of spices. We are very generous with our spices. So that is one thing that you guys are going to learn throughout this experience with me. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take each piece, the chicken. Try not to like peel off the skin. You want to make sure that the skin is kind of intact. And I'm basically just putting it onto one of the layers. The chicken is uber duper hot. And I'm going to take this piece, a couple of pieces that didn't get any love. So we're gonna add some of that to there. Okay, and then we're basically gonna turn it over to the other side. So you might make a bit of a mess, but cooking can get messy. So, you know, it's part of the experience, it's part of the fun. So I'm gonna flip it over, flip all my pieces over, and then we are going to add the spices to the other side just to make sure it's evenly spread out. And then I'm going to show you this kind of thing that I use literally for all of my chicken, and you guys genuinely have to buy it because it is a game changer. So we are nearly done with the spices. Do that. Okay. Spread it out. Make sure it is even on top of the chicken. And then we're going to come in with our oven pot, which I can't remove the lid for. So this is the oven pot, making a bit of a sound, but this is an incredible pot. So this is actually a pot that I got a really long time ago. My mom actually introduced me to it. And so it basically, it kind of insulates the moisture in your chicken. So instead of you feeling like it's kind of escaping, or you're having like the steam escape from the dish, you're gonna have all of the dish kind of incubate all of the moisture within it, and it will keep the chicken super juicy and you won't regret it. So this is one of the best buys that I've ever had. So I'm gonna put my chicken, layer it up in here, and it's fine if it overlaps because it's going to continue to cook together, and it's also partially cooked. I've also preheated my oven, so always preheat your oven so that you can make sure that it's at a good temperature, and you don't want to get rid of any of this. So you're just going to basically scoop this all up and pour it inside the pot, just to make sure that you're getting all of those spices on the whole entire dish. And then we're going to take the whole spices that we had in the stock, so don't waste those, Put them back in here, your onions, your cloves, your cardamom, all of this beautiful flavoring that you're gonna need. And then the last step is basically what you're gonna do is you're gonna add some olive oil and you're gonna add some water. So I've actually mixed them together in this bowl. The olive oil and the water will just make sure that the chicken doesn't dry out in this process, and it kind of retains that moisture, and it kind of creates like a steaming effect in the pot itself. And I cook everything with olive oil. I know that a lot of people, there's like a ongoing debate about how olive oil has like a very low heating point. But truly, I cook everything in my olive oil. The only time that I don't use olive oil is when I'm frying something. So I use a canola oil or a neutral oil for that. But olive oil all the way through, and olive oil is obviously the most essential ingredient. I mean, besides the sumac in this dish, it is a celebration of the olive oil harvest, and we need it to shine across the dish. So I've got the olive oil here and the water. I'm just gonna pour it through onto the chicken, make sure it covers it all. It's not going to be like a super like high layer, but then again, the chicken is also going to release moisture, so you're going to find that there's going to be quite a bit of liquid in the pot, but that's completely fine. So I'm going to take my gloves off here, wipe off some of these, and then I'm going to go in with the lid. So the lid is kind of like a higher lid, it doesn't squish it down, and again, it's going to create kind of like an incubator process. So we're going to take this, we're going to throw it into the oven. Because it was boiling for about 15 minutes, you want to put it into the oven for about 45 minutes to 1 hour, just to make sure that it's fully cooked through. You can also take a thermometer, stick it into the chicken, make sure that it's cooked. But generally, 45 minutes to an hour, it should be done. It's on 180 degrees in the oven, and then you'll be good to go. So that is your chicken. We're gonna put it in the oven, and then we'll get onto the onions. Okay, so now we're going to be moving on to the onions. And the onions are honestly an essential element to kind of bring all of this dish together. So we've talked about the chicken, and we've put the chicken into the oven, and now we're going to do the onions. So the onions, we've got some finely chopped red onions here. What I like about red onions, yes, it's going to make you cry. Didn't capture that on camera, but it really does bring the tears out. But it's got incredible flavor. And the red onions has a bit of kind of this like spice to it, whereas like white onions or brown onions might have a bit more sweetness to it. And we don't necessarily want that. We want to have that kind of pungent flavor to the dish, and we want to make sure that the onions have that. So roughly chopped, or not roughly chopped, finely chopped our onions. This is a big amount of onions, so you need to have a lot because you want to basically be able to do the layering. You can repurpose these onions into something else if you want to, but you need to start off with a good amount. So this is like nearly a kilo of onions, and you would need to freshly chop it. If you leave them in the fridge for too long, it will lose that flavor. So we're going to be adding it to our pot here. It's a clean pot, nothing in the pot, just got our onions that we're going to be adding. And then we're going to be adding, of course, our olive oil. So there are two stages to cooking your onions. We've got the first stage, which is basically with the olive oil. So we've got the Palestinian olive oil, of course. I'm going to be adding it. This is about nearly half a cup. But again, you're going to get all your measurements in the recipe. And then we're also going to be adding our spices. So in these spices, we've got, of course, our fine sea salt, but we've also got some cumin. And the cumin helps balance out the bloating effect that onions create. So of course, a lot of people are now kind of avoiding onions, avoiding garlic because of the effects that it creates to their systems, but the cumin balances that out. So I add the cumin to the onions to kind of reduce that flavor. And of course, there's a bit of black pepper. So we're gonna take this to the stove. I'm just gonna mix it through here, and then you're gonna be able to see that it's gonna kind of start to saute. I got a bit of a tickle in my throat from the black pepper, but it means that it's good black pepper. So we're gonna put it onto the stovetop, and it's gonna cook for about 20 minutes. So you're gonna wanna keep it on like kind of a low heat, let it cook for a little bit, let them become translucent, and then we're going to be moving on to the next step, which is adding the chicken stock and of course the sumac for the second part of the onion cooking. So let's go to the onion, to the stove, and I'm gonna turn this on. And you're gonna start to hear the sizzle of the onions, but of course, because it's a large quantity of onions, you don't want it to to be on too high of a heat. You don't want to char your onions. You just kind of want to slowly saute them. And you're going to start to hear the sizzle. Maybe in the future we'll start to be able to capture the smell of food in the kitchen. But once you start to hear the sizzle of your onions, you're going to be able to see that they're starting to become translucent and they're starting to cook well. So I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the toppings. And snowbud or pine nuts and lows or almonds are two things that we consistently put across all of our dishes. So it's always a topping, and it's the idea of adding kind of that earthiness to the dish. So snowbud or pine nuts have actually become like the new caviar. They are very expensive in the market, but it is something that we never skip on. And it's kind of like a nice decoration. So instead of like putting, you know, in Western food, you might find them putting like a bit of parsley or a bit of like some greens on the top. Our accompaniment to our dishes are the pine nuts and the almonds. So we're gonna be frying some of the almonds and some of the pine nuts, and we're gonna be frying them separately because they have different kind of burning or frying points. The snowbud or the pine nuts fry much quicker than the almonds. So I actually like to put the almonds first, let them cook, and then I can add the pine nuts on top of that. Or you can also cook them separately, fry them separately, of course in olive oil, and then you're good to go. So we're gonna be going into that. Okay, so the onions have been cooking. It had the olive oil, it had the cumin, it had all of that stuff. We're now going to be adding the second stage to the onion. So I'm going to take them off the stove. And as you can see, the onions have got this kind of like beautiful translucent color, which is exactly what we want. They're not crispy, they're just sauteed. And we're going to be adding the chicken stock, so the chicken stock that we had cooked the chicken in. I put it into a measuring cup. It's always good to put your measurements into everything and measure your stuff out. So I'm going to be adding that. It's going to add flavor, but it's also going to be adding the liquid. And you're going to understand why we need this liquid when we're going to start layering up. And then, of course, the most important element that we're going to be adding to this dish is our sumac. So I've got about 4 tablespoons. It's quite a bit, but you need all of that tangy flavor. And of course, onion needs a lot of seasoning and a lot of flavoring to it. So it's going to be creating a beautiful kind of flavor to it. We're going to put it back on the stove for another 15 to 20 minutes just to make sure that it kind of processes all those flavors, absorbs all those flavors, and then we will move on to the next step. So the chicken is finally done. It's been in the oven for about an hour. I'm going to take it out. I'm going to put my glove on, take it out from the oven. And here we go. Close the oven up, and it's time for the chicken reveal. If only you guys could smell what I'm smelling. It smells absolutely incredible. I'm going to take this glove off, and we are now ready to finally construct all of the different elements that create Msakhan. And it's time for another story to tell you guys. So I'm going to bring in this bread, and this bread, first of all, this is how you would get it from the bakery, in a brown paper bag, wrapped up, and we've cut them up, but it usually comes as a whole piece. So this is basically taboon. Taboon is a bread that kind of has like a bit of pockets in it. I actually get my bread from a Palestinian bakery, try to support Palestinians as much as possible throughout my whole experience. And the way that it's cooked is it's usually cooked in an outdoor oven over some coal and some stones. So the stones kind of create these like little like grooves within the bread, and it usually comes as like a very big round taboon. So these are basically 4 parts of it would form a round taboon bread. And I like to chop it up because I'm going to be dipping it into the oil and dipping it into the onions just to absorb all those flavors, and it allows me to be able to do that in the pot that I've got. But you can potentially use an alternative bread if you need to. Some people use actually Afghani bread, as an alternative. But if you have access to taboon, taboon is an essential part. It is integral in our identity as Palestinians, and it is at the heart of this dish. The reason why we use taboon is because it's a bit thicker, so it has capacity to absorb all of those flavors. And the reason why I say that is because it's going to be dipped in the oil and into the onion. So you want it to not become too soggy, but the soggier that it gets, the more flavor that it's going to kind of bring to your table and bring to your dish. So I have cut it up into a couple of squares, and I'm going to be showing you guys, or triangles, and I'm going to be showing you guys how to layer your msakhan. So what we're going to start off with is, we've got our onions. I don't know if you guys can see, but do you see how beautiful that color of the onions are? And that color comes exclusively from the sumac. So the sumac adds that color and of course the flavor to it. So what I'm going to go and do is I'm going to take one of these triangles. I'm going to dip it in the oil from one side, so it's kind of like soaked up, and then I'm going to dip it from the other side. You can of course wear gloves if you want to, but I actually believe in a word that we actually use in Arabic, which is nafas, and nafas means your soul. And when you're working with your hands, you actually end up transferring a part of your soul into the dish. And so when our grandmothers would always cook, they used to cook with so much love, and you could taste that love in the food. And if you're cooking when you're angry, it actually shows in your food. I've cooked angry and I've had dishes come out that weren't so great. So I would highly recommend that you don't shy away from working with your hands. And of course, this dish is eaten by eating with your hands. So you can get a little bit messy while you're prepping it. So I'm basically using, creating kind of like my circle again, but it's kind of chopped up. And I'm also plating it, of course, in the Hebron ceramic. So it's not just about our food, but it's also about our identity and our culture. And this plate is a beautiful plate because it's actually hand painted. So not, you will find the same patterns on Khalili ceramic or Hebron ceramics, but each of them will have a bit of like a difference to the other because they are hand painted. And this distinct pattern, this distinct color, the blue with the multicolor, is unique to Hebron, and it is part of our Palestinian identity. And I love to serve stuff in them. It's a beautiful kind of centerpiece for your tables when you're hosting with friends, but it also brings in another element of Palestine to the table. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a spoonful of the onions, put them onto the taboon pieces. You can also take some of the liquid, but also you do have some of the liquid on the bread itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep going around, all around, adding the onions to the layer. And then another tip that I have is for you to put some fresh sumac. The fresh sumac just adds that kind of, it adds like an extra layer. Of course, the onions have the sumac on them, but the fresh sumac creates a different experience. So I'm just sprinkling it onto each of these pieces. And you're going to basically continue doing this. So it depends on the quantities that you're going to make, but you're going to keep layering. So I've got another batch of taboon, and I'm going to keep dipping it into here as well. And you're basically creating like a cake to layer on top of each other. And it's such a beautiful kind of centerpiece. It's a celebration dish. It's a crowd pleaser. And it's a playful dish because when you're eating with your hand, you get to be a little bit more playful. You don't have to kind of follow that, you know, the expectations of using forks and knives, but you can dive in, you can get messy, and that's the fun part of it. So I'm creating my second layer of my bread. And the bread has capacity to like absorb all those flavors. So you can see it kind of like dripping. It's getting messy, but that's the fun part of it. And now I'm going to do another layer of the onions as my final layer. And then, and of course you can increase the onions. You can put some onions on your plate. There really isn't like a set rule to it, but I wanted to show you the basic process of how to make msakhan. And then you can get comfortable with it. You can do whatever you want with it. You can keep the taboon whole. You can cut it up. But this is the 1, 2, 3s of making msakhan. Okay, just add a little bit more to this one because it's a bit bigger. And then we're going to go in with our sumac. And then the last layer, so once you're done with all of your taboon, you're going to basically be putting the chicken on top. So the chicken is kind of like the top layer. And then when you want to spread it out around the people, they can grab a piece of the taboon, a piece of chicken, and they can start digging in. And typically with Msakhan, we pair it with yogurt, so just plain yogurt. I actually like to salt my yogurt because it adds a bit more flavor to it. But the yogurt also balances out all of these kind of like rich flavors. So the yogurt gives that freshness that you need. It reduces the heaviness of the dish, and yogurt also cools your palate down. So while you're eating all of these kind of like intense flavors, the yogurt adds that freshness that allows you to continue eating and hopefully finishing the food, because Teta would always tell me we can't have any food left. So now I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna add my chicken to the dish. So you can add it on top. I don't wanna damage the pieces, but this chicken is smelling incredible, if I may say so myself. And beautiful thing, I actually love the pieces at the bottom because they've got a bit of like that juice to it. Oh, this piece is falling off the bone, which is what we want to see. You're just gonna avoid the whole spices because you don't need those anymore. And then we're going in with our last piece. And what I actually like to do is try to make this a little bit prettier. What I like to do is I actually like to go in, take a bit of this sauce because it's got so much flavor. It's got all of the juices from the chicken. You can obviously use a slightly larger spoon, but you just want to drizzle a tiny bit of those like flavors on top. Give the chicken a bit of a shine, and it will just kind of add the flavors to it. And there's no harm in a bit of that juice on top. So we've added the juices, and our last step, of course, is the fried pine nuts and the fried almonds. So you see how golden they are? I fried them separately because they have the different heating points or frying points. But I like to be super generous with my with my almonds and my pine nuts on top, because it is just kind of the best part of the dish for me. I'm obsessed with nuts, so I would highly recommend that you go all in. And look how pretty it looks, you know? It just adds this like kind of variation, I guess, to the colors, and it just completes the dish. So, oh, forgot a piece of chicken. Let's put that one back in. Make sure we have all our chicken in there. And our dish is, get some more of these. Okay. Our dish is done. So this is Msakhan, guys. And it is an incredible dish. It is one of my favorite dishes. It is coma inducing, so I wouldn't recommend that you have it for dinner. I have served it at dinners, but I always encourage people to maybe have some miramiyeh or sage at the end, just to kind of like let them process and digest the food that they've eaten. But truly, it is a dish that you could probably have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It is the national dish of Palestine. It is a dish that we are very proud to call the national dish of Palestine, and it is a true representation of what, you know, Palestinian food is. It's got the incredible bread, it's got the onions, it's got the summa, it's got the chicken, and of course it's got the fried nuts on top. And it is a showstopper. Everyone that you will cook it for will love you for it. And I hope that you get to enjoy the recipe. I hope you get to enjoy the process with me. I hope that you got to understand everything about Msakhan, and I can't wait to see what you guys do and how your Msakhans turn out.